James stood in the center of the grand ballroom, the epitome of success. The chandeliers sparkled above him, reflecting the light of laughter and conversations swirling around. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, the fabric hugging his frame just right, but inside, he felt hollow. The gala was a celebration of his latest business achievement, yet the applause felt distant, as if it came from another world. Colleagues surrounded him, their smiles bright, but James could sense the superficiality of it all. They praised him, each compliment an echo of the empty validation that haunted him. "James, you've outdone yourself this time," one of his associates exclaimed, raising a glass in his direction. "Thanks, Mark. Just doing what needs to be done," James replied, forcing a smile. As the night progressed, he found himself drifting away from the crowd, seeking solace in the quiet corners of the room. He watched as laughter erupted, glasses clinked, and deals were made, but nothing resonated with him. The weight of his past hung heavily on his shoulders, a reminder of the loneliness that success had not filled. He excused himself from yet another conversation and stepped outside into the cool night air, hoping for a moment of clarity. The city buzzed around him, the sounds of cars and distant conversations blending into a cacophony. He walked aimlessly, allowing the cool breeze to wash over him, yet the feeling of emptiness lingered. As he strolled through a nearby park, he noticed the moonlight filtering through the leaves, casting delicate shadows on the ground. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos he had just left behind. Suddenly, a voice broke through his thoughts, startling him. "James, is that you?" He turned to see an elderly woman standing a few paces away. Her hair was silver, and her face was weathered but kind. There was something about her that felt familiar, yet he could not place her. "Do I know you?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. The woman took a step closer, her eyes glistening with tears. I'm Lucy. I'm your mother." The shock hit him like a freight train. His heart raced, and he felt the ground shift beneath him. James had spent years building walls around his heart, and now they felt like they were crumbling. "No, that's not possible. My mother is gone." He took a step back, trying to process the revelation. Lucy's face fell, a mixture of hope and sorrow flooding her features. "I know it's hard to believe. I never wanted to leave you, James. I had to. Had to? You disappeared. I grew up in an orphanage, wondering what I did wrong." His voice rose, a mix of anger and heartbreak. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "It was for your safety." James shook his head, the memories of his childhood flooding back. Cold rooms, the sound of crying children, loneliness that wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. "You left me. You abandoned me. What could possibly justify that?" Lucy took a deep breath, her hands trembling at her sides. "I can explain everything. Please, let me know." He turned away, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. He didn't want to hear her excuses. He wanted to walk away, to forget this moment ever happened. But as he walked, Lucy's words echoed in his mind. "You don't understand. I've searched for you all these years," she called after him, desperation lacing her voice. James paused, closing his eyes as he fought against the flood of memories and feelings she had unleashed. "You should have thought of that before you left," he muttered, his heart pounding. As he continued his walk home, the image of Lucy haunted him. He tried to shake it off, to focus on the skyscrapers and the city lights, but her face lingered in his mind, a ghost of his past that he could not escape. Memories of his childhood swirled around him, taunting him. The laughter of other kids, the feeling of being unwanted, the aching emptiness of not having a mother. He arrived at his apartment, the door shutting behind him with a definitive click, yet it felt as though the world outside had not let him go. He leaned against the door, breathing heavily. "What just happened?" he whispered to himself, grappling with the weight of the encounter. James sunk onto the couch, running a hand through his hair, trying to compose his thoughts. The gala, the accolades, the money, they all felt meaningless now. For years, he had convinced himself that success was the answer, that it could fill the void left by his mother's absence. But here was Lucy, claiming to be the missing piece of a puzzle he thought he had long since completed. Why now? He questioned the emptiness of his living room, his voice tinged with bitterness. After all these years, why come back? He glanced at his phone, the screen glowing dimly in the dark. He could call Mark, discuss the company, talk shop, but the thought seemed futile. Instead, he found his thoughts drifting back to Lucy, her sad eyes, and the tremor in her voice. She's a stranger, he reminded himself, but the words felt hollow. Deep down, he knew she was more than just a stranger. She was a part of him, a link to a past he had tried so hard to forget. Just as he began to process the whirlwind of emotions, his phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Mark, reminding him of their upcoming meeting to discuss the future of the company. James's heart sank further. How could he focus on work when his entire world had just been turned upside down? He reclined against the couch, staring at the ceiling. "What do I do now?" he murmured, feeling the weight of the decision that loomed ahead. The encounter with Lucy was just the beginning, an opening of a door he had long thought closed. But now, standing at the threshold, he was terrified of what lay beyond. As he closed his eyes, he tried to picture his life before the encounter, but all that filled his mind was the image of Lucy, a woman who claimed to be his mother, who had vanished from his life and reappeared in a moment that felt like a dream. He felt a mixture of anger and confusion, but beneath it all, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But hope was dangerous, and James had learned to guard his heart fiercely. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, he knew he would have to confront this new reality, even if it scared him to his core. James sat in a quaint cafe on the edge of Central Park, the sun filtering through the leaves overhead, illuminating the table where he awaited Lucy. His heart raced with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. He had spent the past few days wrestling with the emotions that surged within him after their unexpected encounter. The world around him felt vibrant, yet his mind was clouded with memories of the past, memories he had long buried. As he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, he replayed the moment when Lucy had approached him in the park, her frail figure standing out against the backdrop of his busy life. "James," she had said, her voice trembling yet resolute, "I'm your mother." The shock had rendered him speechless, and even now, the echo of her words haunted him. He had spent years constructing a life devoid of the very woman who had given him life, and now she was here, demanding a place in his world. "Mr. James?" A soft voice broke through his reverie. He looked up to find Lucy standing before him, her white hair framing her face like a halo, her eyes a mix of hope and apprehension. She was dressed modestly, a stark contrast to the tailored suits of his world. He gestured for her to sit, his heart pounding in his chest. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He wasn't entirely sure why he had agreed to meet her, but a part of him craved answers. "I know this is difficult for you," Lucy replied, her gaze fixed on him, "but I'm not here to disrupt your life. I just want to explain, to help you understand." James took a deep breath, his mind racing with questions. "Understand what, exactly? Why you disappeared? Why I spent my childhood in an orphanage?" The bitterness in his voice surprised him, but he couldn't suppress it. "Do you have any idea what that was like?" Lucy flinched at his words, but there was a resilience in her demeanor. "I do, James. I know it wasn't easy for you. I've thought about you every single day since." Her voice trailed off as she wrestled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I had my reasons for leaving, and I wish I could go back and change things." "Reasons?" James scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "What could possibly justify leaving your child behind?" "I was just a kid, Lucy. I had no one. I needed you." The anger bubbled to the surface, and he felt the heat rise in his cheeks. "I understand your anger," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But please let me explain. I was young, scared, and in a situation that was beyond my control. I thought I was doing what was best for you." "What's best for me?" James laughed bitterly. "You think abandoning me was best for me? I had to fend for myself in a world that didn't want me." Lucy reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it over his. "James, please listen. I didn't want to leave you. I was forced into a situation I couldn't handle. There were threats, and I was afraid of what might happen to you if I stayed. I thought the orphanage would be a safer place for you." James withdrew his hand, the gesture feeling too intimate, too vulnerable. "You don't get to justify your choices after all these years. I grew up alone, with no family, no love. I built this life to escape that pain, and now you come back and think you can just explain it all away?" Lucy's face fell, and for a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. The cafe was bustling around them, couples chatting and laughter filling the air. But in that moment, they existed in a world of their own, filled with tension and unresolved feelings. "I'm not here to make excuses," Lucy finally said, her voice steadying. "I'm here to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I never stopped loving you, James. You were always in my heart." James's eyes narrowed, and he struggled to reconcile her words with the reality of his childhood. Love doesn't leave a child behind. Love doesn't abandon a family. The words were laced with a bitterness that he couldn't shake off. "I know," Lucy whispered, her voice breaking, "and I can't change the past, but I want to be a part of your life now, if you'll let me. I want to share everything I couldn't before." "And what exactly would that entail?" James questioned, his skepticism evident. "You can't just waltz back into my life and expect everything to be fine. I'm not some kid waiting for his mother to come back." "I understand," she replied, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "But I can tell you about your childhood, things you don't remember, things that might help you understand why I had to leave. There's so much you don't know." James sighed heavily, his defenses slowly crumbling. "Fine," he said, his tone begrudging. "Tell me, what could you possibly say that would make any of this worthwhile?" Lucy took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You had a brother, James. A twin. His name was Jacob." The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. "A brother," he echoed, disbelief written all over his face. "You had another child? And you left him too?" "I didn't leave him, I swear," Lucy rushed to explain, her voice tinged with desperation. "He was taken from us. When I had to leave, I couldn't take you both. I thought I was protecting you, but I lost him too. I've spent years searching for him." James felt a wave of emotions crash over him, confusion, anger, and a flicker of hope. "So, what happened to him? Where is he?" "I don't know," Lucy admitted, "but I've been trying to find him. All these years, I've been looking for both of you. I never wanted to lose you." The weight of her words settled over him, heavy yet compelling. He felt a strange connection to the brother he had never known, a bond that tied him to a past he had long tried to forget. "And you think telling me this will make it all better?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "No," Lucy replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that you weren't alone. You had someone who cared, even if I couldn't be there." James's heart softened slightly at her vulnerability, but the distance between them still felt insurmountable. "What do you want from me, Lucy? Do you want me to be your son again? To just forget everything?" "I want you to give me a chance," she urged, her voice breaking. "Not just for me, but for you. You deserve to know your past, to understand who you are." James stared at her, torn between the desire for answers and the fear of opening old wounds. "I don't know if I can do that," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Please," Lucy pleaded, her eyes pleading, "let me help you find the truth. Let me be a part of your life. We can start to heal together." In that moment, James realized that he stood at a crossroads. He could continue to build walls around his heart or take a leap of faith into the unknown. Taking a deep breath, he made his choice. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'll listen, but know this, you have a long way to go to earn my trust." Lucy nodded, relief washing over her. "That's all I ask," she said, a faint smile breaking through her tears. "I promise to be here, no matter how long it takes." As they sat there, the sunlight pouring through the cafe windows, James felt a shift within himself. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with pain and healing, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. James stepped into the sleek, glass-walled office of his company, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The ambient sounds of New York City filtered through the windows, a bustling reminder of the life he had built, one of success, power, and seemingly endless possibilities. Yet, deep within him, there was an unsettling turmoil that had been ignited by his recent encounter with Lucy. As he settled into his chair, he caught a glimpse of Mark, his business partner, pacing restlessly in the conference room, a storm brewing in his eyes. "James, we need to talk," Mark said, his voice laced with urgency as James walked in. The room was cluttered with reports and projections, but the tension was palpable, thickening the air between them. "What's going on?" James replied, trying to maintain his composure, though he knew Mark well enough to sense the brewing conflict. "It's about the investor. We need to finalize the deal soon." "He's not going to wait forever," Mark said, folding his arms across his chest. "If we want to secure the future of this company, we have to make a move." James felt his heart race at the mention of the investor. While the prospect of a buyout could lead to greater financial stability, it felt like a betrayal of everything he had built. "I don't know, Mark. Selling out now seems like a mistake. We've worked hard to create something meaningful here." Mark leaned in, his voice dropping. "You're not thinking clearly. This isn't just about you anymore. You've been distracted lately, ever since that woman showed up. Is she getting into your head? Because I can't have you jeopardizing our future over some unresolved family drama." James clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Lucy is not just some woman. She's my mother. And you have no idea what I'm going through right now." He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, memories of his childhood swirling in his mind like a tempest. Mark raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Do you really believe that? You don't even know her. How can you trust anything she says after all these years? You're letting your past cloud your judgment." The accusation stung, and James took a step back, trying to quell the rising tide of frustration. "I'm not letting my past dictate my decisions. I'm trying to understand it. There's a difference." "Is there?" Mark shot back, his voice raising slightly. "Because it sounds like you're using this as an excuse to avoid making the hard choices." James inhaled deeply, feeling the walls of the office closing in around him. He turned away, gazing out the window at the sprawling cityscape, a stark contrast to the chaos within. "I need some time to think," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper as he walked towards his office. As he entered the familiar space, filled with awards and accolades, he felt a wave of disorientation wash over him. The accolades that once filled him with pride now felt hollow, remnants of a life built on a shaky foundation. He sank into his chair, the weight of Mark's words echoing in his mind. He was torn between his obligations to the company and the emotional upheaval that Lucy had brought back into his life. He pulled out a folder, reviewing the latest financial reports, but the numbers blurred before his eyes. Instead, he found himself lost in memories of a childhood spent in an orphanage, each recollection sharper and more painful than the last. The laughter of other children, the smell of cheap food, the loneliness that had lingered like a shadow, it all rushed back. "James?" A voice interrupted his reverie. It was Mark, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a look of concern on his face. "I didn't mean to push you. I'm worried about you." James looked up, his walls beginning to crack. "I know. It's just, everything feels so heavy right now. I'm trying to process this whole situation with Lucy. I thought I had my life figured out, but now," he trailed off, feeling vulnerable. Mark stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Look, I get it. Family issues can be overwhelming, but don't let it affect the company. We've worked too hard to let anything jeopardize it. You're a leader here, and you need to act like one." "I am trying," James replied, frustration creeping back into his voice. "But the more I think about it, the more I realize that I can't just ignore who I am and where I came from. This isn't just about business, Mark. It's about my identity." "Then figure it out," Mark urged, his tone softening. "But don't lose sight of what's at stake. You've built something great here. Don't throw it away chasing ghosts." James sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. I know you're right. I just need to find a way to balance both parts of my life. I can't let one overshadow the other." "Then do it," Mark said, a determined glint in his eye. "Make a decision. You're the one in charge. Stand up for what you believe in, and let's go from there." With those words, a flicker of resolve ignited within James. He realized that he didn't have to choose between his past and his present. He could confront the shadows of his childhood while still fighting for the future he envisioned for his company. "I will," he said, determination lacing his voice. "I'll find a way to make this work." As Mark left, James leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city that had once felt so inviting. The skyline, filled with promise, now appeared to him as a reflection of his internal struggle, a labyrinth of ambition and unresolved pain. He knew he needed to confront Lucy again, to delve deeper into the past, but he also understood that he couldn't let it consume him. The day stretched on, filled with meetings and phone calls, but James's mind drifted, caught between the boardroom and the memories of the orphanage. With every decision he made, he felt the weight of his past pressing down. Yet a new clarity began to emerge. He would not allow Lucy's reappearance to derail him. Instead, he would use it as fuel to forge ahead. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the office, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. He still had a long way to go, but he was ready to face whatever came next, both in his business and in his heart. The journey to understanding his past and reconciling it with his present was just beginning, but he was determined to embrace both sides of himself. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long while, James felt he could walk it with his head held high. James sat in the cozy corner of a quaint cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee swirling around him, mixing with the faint sound of jazz playing in the background. He had reached out to Sophie, a childhood friend who had become a trusted therapist over the years. After the tumultuous encounter with Lucy, his biological mother, he found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions that he couldn't quite put into words. He needed guidance, and Sophie was the perfect person to help him navigate through this storm. As he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, he felt a familiar presence. Sophie entered, her warm smile instantly putting him at ease. "Hey, James," she greeted, sliding into the seat across from him. "You look like you've been wrestling with more than just your thoughts." "Yeah, you could say that," he replied, forcing a smile. "I had a rather complicated meeting with someone I never thought I'd see again." Sophie leaned in, her expression shifting to one of concern. "Is it about Lucy, your mother?" James nodded, the name feeling heavy on his tongue. "She claims to be my mother, Sophie. After all these years, she just shows up out of the blue. It feels surreal, and honestly, I don't know how to process it all." Sophie took a sip of her coffee, allowing a moment of silence to pass as she considered her next words. "It's understandable, James. This is a lot to unpack. Have you thought about how you really feel about her being back in your life?" "I'm angry," he confessed, his voice rising slightly. "Angry that she left, angry that I had to grow up in an orphanage, feeling unwanted and abandoned. And now she wants to talk about it? Like it's all just fine?" Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "It makes sense to feel that way. You've carried that pain for so long, and now someone who contributed to that hurt is trying to re-enter your life. But maybe there's more to the story. Have you given yourself the chance to hear her out?" James leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "I don't know if I want to hear her excuses. It's all so complicated. What am I supposed to do? Just forgive and forget?" "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Sophie replied gently. "It's about freeing yourself from the weight of that anger. Writing can be a powerful tool to explore those emotions. Have you considered journaling your thoughts? It might help clarify how you feel." James sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've never been one for writing. I'm more of a numbers and spreadsheets guy, you know? But maybe it's worth a shot. I just don't want to dive back into those memories. They're painful." "Sometimes revisiting those memories can lead to healing," Sophie encouraged. "You have a lot of strength inside you, James. You've built a successful life despite everything. Writing about your past might help you see just how far you've come." He looked out the window, watching people pass by, each with their own stories, their own struggles. What if I can't handle what I uncover? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Then we deal with it together, Sophie assured him, her eyes softening. You're not alone in this. I'm here to help you navigate through whatever comes up. The conversation lingered in the air as James contemplated her words. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. All right, I'll give it a try, he finally said. I'll start writing. Sophie smiled, sensing a glimmer of hope in his voice. That's the spirit. Just let the words flow. No judgment, no pressure, just you and your thoughts. As they continued to talk, James realized that he had been carrying the burden of his past alone for too long. The thought of writing felt daunting, but it also ignited a flicker of curiosity about his own story, about the boy who had grown up in an orphanage, the boy who had learned to build walls around his heart, and now the man who stood at a crossroads between his past and present. Later that evening, he sat at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. The silence in his apartment felt oppressive, but he picked up a pen and began to write. Memories flooded back, images of his time in the orphanage, the cold, sterile walls, the distant sounds of laughter from children who had families. He jotted down feelings of loneliness, the ache of longing for a mother's embrace. As he wrote, he felt the tears welling up in his eyes, a release he hadn't anticipated. I was so alone, he murmured to himself, his heart heavy with the weight of his past, so desperate for connection. In the days that followed, James found solace in his writing. With each sentence, he unearthed layers of pain and resilience he never knew he possessed. He recalled the friendships he had formed, the moments of joy amidst the sorrow, and the lessons he had learned about survival and determination. One afternoon, he decided to share some of his writings with Sophie during their next session. As he read a passage aloud, describing a particularly painful memory from his childhood, he noticed Sophie's thoughtful expression. James, she said softly once he finished, this is powerful. You've captured your emotions so vividly. It's clear that writing is helping you process what you've been through. He nodded, feeling a mix of vulnerability and strength. It's cathartic, but it's also painful. I can't believe how much I've buried all these years. That's the first step to healing, Sophie replied, her voice encouraging. Acknowledging the pain is crucial. It allows you to confront it and, ultimately, to let it go. As the sessions continued, James began to feel a shift within himself. He could feel the walls he had built around his heart starting to crack. He was learning to embrace his emotions, to understand that it was okay to feel hurt, to feel lost, and to seek connection. One evening, while reflecting on his journey, he decided to reach out to Lucy again. It felt daunting, but he realized that he needed to confront her, to understand her side of the story. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, his heart racing as he waited for her to pick up. Hello? Her voice was tentative, yet filled with warmth. Lucy, he began, hesitating for a moment. I think we need to talk again. I want to understand everything. There was a pause, and he could almost feel her surprise. I would like that, James. I really would. As they set a date to meet, James felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. It was time to face the ghosts of his past, to seek the truth that had eluded him for so long. He was ready to embrace the complexity of his emotions and to walk the path toward healing and understanding, both for himself and for the woman who had been a stranger for most of his life. James stood outside the gates of the orphanage, his heart pounding in his chest. The imposing structure loomed before him, a blend of memories both sweet and bitter. It had been years since he had last set foot here, and the weight of his past pressed down on him like a heavy shroud. He could almost hear the echoes of laughter and the cries of children that once filled these walls. But now, all that remained were the ghosts of his childhood. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the wrought iron gate and stepped inside. The familiar scent of aged wood and lingering sadness enveloped him. As he walked down the path, he was struck by how little had changed. The trees were taller, their branches casting long shadows on the ground, but the paint on the walls was just as chipped, and the windows still bore the same faded curtains. As James approached the entrance, he noticed a group of children playing in the yard. Their laughter was infectious, yet it pierced his heart like a knife. He remembered those carefree days when he, too, had been one of them, filled with hope and dreams, unaware of the trials that awaited him. James. A voice broke through his reverie. He turned to see a familiar face, Tommy, his childhood friend, who had been a constant presence during their time at the orphanage. Tommy's hair had turned silver, but his smile was unchanged. "Is that really you?" "Tommy," James exclaimed, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. They embraced tightly, as if trying to recapture the lost years. "I can't believe it's you. How long has it been?" "Too long, my friend. I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Tommy said, his eyes sparkling with joy. "What brings you back to this old place?" I needed to come," James replied, unsure of how to articulate the whirlwind of emotions that had led him here. "I've been trying to make sense of my past, and I thought maybe coming back would help." Tommy nodded, understanding in his gaze. "It's never easy, is it? This place holds so many memories, both good and bad. Want to take a walk around?" "Yeah, I'd like that," James said, grateful for the familiar company. As they strolled through the grounds, Tommy shared stories of the children who still live there. "Some things never change," Tommy remarked with a chuckle. "Remember the time we hid in the attic to avoid chores? We thought we were so clever." James laughed, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Of course. And then we ended up getting caught anyway. I think Mrs. Henderson almost had a heart attack." As they continued walking, they reached the old playroom, its door slightly ajar. James hesitated before stepping inside. The room was dimly lit, and the dust particles danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the window. Old toys were scattered across the floor, remnants of laughter and joy long gone. "This was our escape," Tommy said softly, his voice filled with reverence. "We spent hours in here, dreaming of adventures beyond these walls." James's heart ached as he picked up a ragged teddy bear, its button eyes gazing back at him. "I remember this," he murmured. "I used to take it everywhere with me. It was my only comfort." Tommy's expression grew serious. "Do you ever wonder what could have been if things had been different? If we hadn't ended up here?" "Every day," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my life trying to forget, trying to build something out of nothing. But now it feels like I can't escape it anymore." "Facing the past is tough," Tommy said, placing a hand on James's shoulder. "But you're not alone in this. We all carry our scars, but they don't define who we are. It's what we do with them that matters." James nodded, the weight of Tommy's words sinking in. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking again. "Do you remember Lucy, my mother?" Tommy's eyes widened. "Of course. She was the one who left, wasn't she? I heard rumors, but no one really knew what happened. How do you feel about it?" "I don't know," James confessed, his voice tinged with frustration. "She just showed up out of nowhere, claiming to be my mother. Part of me wants to scream at her for abandoning me. An outer part wants to understand why she left. Reconnecting with her might be the closure you need," Tommy suggested gently. "But it won't be easy. You'll have to confront those feelings head-on." "I know," James replied, running a hand through his hair, "but I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet. It's like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, and one wrong step could send me tumbling down." Tommy smiled, his eyes filled with empathy. "Just remember, it's okay to be scared. You've come this far, and that's something to be proud of. You're stronger than you think." As they continued their walk through the orphanage, James felt an unexpected sense of comfort in Tommy's presence. They shared stories of their lives since leaving the orphanage, of the highs and lows, the triumphs and failures. It was a cathartic experience, one that reminded James of the bond they'd shared as children. Eventually, they found themselves standing in front of James's old room. The door was closed, but he could feel the memories flooding back. The nights spent dreaming of a better life, the tears shed in solitude, the flickering hope that one day he would be free from this place. "Do you want to go in?" Tommy asked, sensing James's hesitation. Taking a deep breath, James nodded. "Yeah, I think I need to." They stepped inside, and James was immediately enveloped by a wave of nostalgia. The walls were still painted a dull shade of yellow, the bedspread faded but familiar. He walked over to the window, looking out at the playground where he had spent countless hours. "This was my sanctuary," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I used to dream about what life would be like outside these walls, about the family I wished I had." Tommy stood quietly beside him, allowing James to process his feelings. "It's okay to grieve for what you lost," he said softly. "You're allowed to feel angry and sad. Just remember, you're not that scared little boy anymore. You've built a life for yourself." James turned to look at Tommy, gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you for being here. I don't think I would have had the courage to come back without you." "Anytime, my friend," Tommy replied, clapping him on the back. "You've got this. Just take it one step at a time." As they left the orphanage, James felt a sense of clarity begin to wash over him. The visit had unearthed memories he had buried for too long, but it had also given him a newfound resolve. He was ready to confront his past, to seek the truth about Lucy, and to finally find a way to heal the wounds that had shaped his life. "Let's grab a drink and talk about the future," Tommy suggested, a grin spreading across his face. "I have a feeling you're about to embark on a whole new adventure." James smiled back, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." Together, they walked away from the orphanage, leaving behind a piece of the past but carrying forward the strength to face whatever lay ahead. James had been wrestling with his emotions ever since he met Lucy, the woman who claimed to be his long-lost mother. The confusion and resentment that had built up since their first encounter began to take a toll on him. He had spent countless hours reflecting on his past, the dark corners of his childhood, and the void that Lucy's sudden reappearance had stirred. Despite his success as a businessman, he felt a growing sense of emptiness within him. As he prepared to meet Lucy again, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that loomed over him. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange hue over the city as he arrived at their agreed meeting place, a quaint cafe tucked away on a quiet street. The warm glow of the lights inside contrasted with the coldness he felt inside. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself that this time would be different, that perhaps he could find some closure. When he entered the cafe, his eyes immediately found Lucy sitting at a corner table, her frail figure hunched over a steaming cup of tea. She looked older than he remembered, her face lined with the weight of years and regrets. He approached her cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "James," she said softly, looking up at him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I'm glad you came." He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I didn't really have a choice, did I?" The words slipped out before he could stop them, laced with bitterness. Lucy sighed, her expression clouding with sadness. "I know this is difficult for you. It's difficult for me too. But I need you to understand why I left." James sat down, crossing his arms defensively. "You've had decades to explain, Lucy. Why now? Why after all this time?" "I had my reasons," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought about you every day, but I was scared. I didn't know how to come back." James leaned in, his frustration boiling over. "Scared? You think I wasn't scared? I grew up in an orphanage, wondering why my mother didn't want me. You could have at least sent a letter. Just something to let me know I wasn't abandoned." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't that simple, James. I wasn't just leaving you. There were things happening that I couldn't control." "Like what?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What could possibly justify leaving your child behind?" She looked away, her hands trembling around the cup. "There were people involved. Dangerous people." James clenched his jaw, frustration boiling within him. "So now it's about protecting me? I've spent my entire life feeling like I didn't matter. You think you can just waltz back in and tell me you were trying to protect me? I tried to protect you by staying away." Lucy's voice was sharp now, cutting through the tension. "I thought it was for the best. I never wanted to put you in danger." "Danger?" he echoed incredulously. "What kind of danger? What could possibly be so catastrophic that you would choose to leave your own child behind?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around as if searching for the right words. "James, please. I can't tell you everything right now. Some things are too painful, too complicated." "Complicated?" he scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. You think my life has been uncomplicated? You think it's easy to grow up without a family? Without knowing who you are?" Lucy's gaze softened, and for a moment, he could see the pain reflected in her eyes. "I never wanted you to suffer. Please believe me. I thought I was making the right choice." "And what about the choices I had to make?" James shot back. "The choice to grow up alone? The choice to build a life with this constant shadow of abandonment hanging over me?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I truly am. But I need you to understand that I'm here now. I want to make things right." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. Despite the anger that bubbled within him, he felt a flicker of something else: curiosity. "What do you want from me? What does making things right even look like?" "I want to know you," Lucy said, her eyes pleading. "I want to hear about your life, your successes, your struggles. I want to be a part of your life, even if it's just a small part." James stared at her, searching for sincerity in her expression. "You want to know me? After all this time? You expect me to just open up?" "I don't expect anything," she replied, her voice steady, "but I hope you will. I want to share my life with you, the reasons behind my choices. I want to explain everything, but it takes time." "Time?" he echoed. "You think we have time? I'm not sure I even want to know you." "Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice firm yet gentle. "Why did you come if you're not willing to try?" James opened his mouth to respond but found no words. The truth was, deep down, he was desperate to understand. He wanted to know why she left, why he had been raised without her. He wanted answers, even if they hurt. "I came because I was curious," he finally admitted, his voice low. "I wanted to hear your side of the story." "Then let's start there," Lucy said, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Tell me about your life. What was it like growing up in the orphanage?" James hesitated, the memories flooding back, memories he had buried deep. "It was lonely," he finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I was always different from the other kids. I felt invisible, like nobody cared." Lucy nodded, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry, James. I never wanted that for you." He looked at her, searching her eyes for the truth. "So what is it? What's the secret you're holding on to? Why did you really leave?" Lucy took a deep breath, clearly grappling with her own emotions. "There's more to the story, James. Things I haven't shared because I didn't know how. But I promise I will tell you. Just please be patient with me." "Patience isn't something I have a lot of," he replied, his tone sharper than intended. "I've spent years waiting for answers." "I know, and I wish I could change the past," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm here now, and I want to build something new with you. Just give me a chance." The tension in the air was palpable, and for a moment, they both sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. James felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. But beneath it all was a flicker of hope. Maybe he could find some semblance of understanding, some path to healing. But the weight of his past still loomed large, casting a shadow over their fragile connection. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resolute. "You've got one chance, Lucy. One chance to prove that you're really here for me. Don't waste it." Lucy nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I promise I won't. I just need you to trust me." As they sat together, the cafe filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking cups, James felt a shift within himself. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, but he also knew it would take time to unravel the knots of his past. Trust didn't come easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of possibility. James found himself in a whirlwind of emotions as he paced his sleek office in the heart of Manhattan. The city outside was alive with the hustle and bustle of evening commuters, but inside, he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. His mind raced with the recent encounter with Lucy, the woman who claimed to be his mother. She had shattered the carefully constructed facade of his life, revealing cracks in the armor he had built to protect himself from the pain of his past. Just moments before, Mark had burst into his office, urgency etched on his face. "James, we need to talk about the investor. He's breathing down our necks, and if we don't make a decision soon, we might lose this opportunity." Mark insisted, his voice strained with pressure. James turned to face him, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. I know, Mark. I've been thinking about it. But this isn't just about the money. We built this company on our values, on trust and integrity. I won't compromise that for a quick sale. Mark crossed his arms, skepticism evident in his posture. You're letting your personal issues cloud your judgment. You've been distracted ever since you met Lucy. This is a business decision, James. You can't let your past dictate your future. James clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. You have no idea what I'm dealing with, he snapped, his voice rising. I'm trying to figure out who I am. I just found out that the woman who abandoned me as a child is back in my life. And now you want me to make a decision that could end everything we've worked for? Mark softened slightly, sensing the turmoil within his partner. I get it, but you need to focus. You can't let this derail us. I care about this company just as much as you do, but we need to act fast. James took a deep breath, feeling the walls of his office closing in on him. I know, Mark. I'll think about it. But right now, I need some time to clear my head. As Mark left, James sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. The sleek modernity of his office felt like a prison, each polished surface reminding him of the life he had built but hadn't truly claimed as his own. He stared out the janola, watching the lights of the city twinkle in the night, wondering how he had ended up in this position, torn between his past and his present. Later that evening, James found himself in a small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee while he attempted to gather his thoughts. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. He pulled out his notebook, the one Sophie had suggested he use to write down his feelings. He flipped to a clean page and began to write. I am a man torn between two worlds. On one hand, I have built a life of success, wealth, and status. But on the other, I am haunted by a past I cannot escape. Lucy has returned, and with her, the memories I thought I had buried forever. I feel suffocated by the expectations of my business and the chaos of my emotions. I don't know what to do. As he wrote, he could hear the chatter of other patrons, their laughter and conversations a dull hum in the background. It was comforting, yet isolating. He felt a presence at his table and looked up to see Sophie standing there, her expression a mix of concern and support. Hey, mind if I join you? She asked, settling into the seat across from him. Of course, I could use some company, James replied, his voice weary. Sophie glanced at his notebook. Writing again? I can see it's weighing heavily on you. James sighed, closing the notebook. It is. Mark is pushing for a decision on the investor, and I'm lost. Everything feels so intertwined right now. My personal life, my business. It's all colliding. Sophie leaned forward, her eyes sympathetic. You're dealing with a lot, James. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. Have you thought about what you really want? Not just for the company, but for yourself? James frowned, the question echoing in his mind. I want to be successful, but at what cost? I feel like I'm living a lie, and Lucy's return has forced me to confront all the pain I thought I had moved past. Sophie nodded. Confronting your past can be painful, but it's also necessary for growth. You have to decide what matters most to you. Is it the success you've built, or is it understanding who you are and where you come from? I don't know, he admitted, his voice cracking. I thought I had it all figured out, but now I'm not so sure. I keep thinking about the orphanage, about how I felt abandoned and alone. I don't want to go back to that place, emotionally or physically. Sophie reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on his. You're not that child anymore, James. You've built a life for yourself, and you're stronger than you realize. But you can't ignore your feelings. You need to explore them, even if it's uncomfortable. James looked into her eyes, searching for answers. What if I find out things I don't want to know? What if Lucy's reasons for leaving are more complicated than I can handle? Then you'll handle it together, Sophie said firmly. You don't have to go through this alone. You have people who care about you, who want to help you navigate this. You just have to be willing to open up. He nodded slowly, considering her words. I guess I've been so focused on my success that I've neglected my emotional health. I've always thought those two worlds were separate, but maybe they're not. Sophie smiled gently. Exactly. It's all part of you. And it's okay to take a step back and figure out what you really want. You owe it a chance, both for yourself and for Lucy. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her encouragement lifting the burden he had been carrying. You're right. I can't keep running from this. I need to face it head-on, even if it's difficult. Good, Sophie said, her voice full of warmth. Just remember, it's a process. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. With a newfound sense of resolve, James realized that he was at a crossroads. He could either surrender to the pressures of his business and allow his past to dictate his future, or he could choose to confront his demons, no matter how painful the journey might be. The decision loomed over him like a shadow, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope amid the uncertainty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, James found himself seated on a weathered bench, the cool breeze ruffling his neatly combed hair. The revelation of Lucy, the woman who claimed to be his mother, hung heavily in the air. She had asked him to meet her again, and he couldn't shake the mix of anticipation and dread that accompanied the thought. Would he finally get the answers he so desperately sought, or would it only deepen the chasm of confusion and resentment already swirling inside him? Lucy arrived a few minutes late, her frail figure silhouetted against the fading light. The lines on her face told a story of years filled with hardship, yet there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes as she approached him. James stood up, forcing a polite smile, but the tension between them was palpable. "Thank you for coming," Lucy said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know this is difficult for you." James nodded, unsure of how to respond. "You said you had something important to tell me," he prompted, his heart racing. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Lucy sat down beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's about why I left all those years ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to abandon you, James." Then why did you?" he interjected, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "You just disappeared. I was a child, Lucy. I didn't understand why you wouldn't come back for me." "I had my reasons," she insisted, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "It wasn't safe for me to return. There were things happening at the orphanage, things I couldn't let you be part of." James felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean? What happened at the orphanage?" He leaned in, desperate for clarity. Lucy hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where the autumn leaves danced in the breeze. "There was abuse, James. I found out that some of the staff were hurting the children. I tried to report it, but I was dismissed. I was scared for you, scared for myself. I thought that by leaving, I could protect you." His breath hitched in his throat as the weight of her words crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Abuse?" he echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Why didn't you come back to save me?" "I was terrified," Lucy said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who to trust. I thought I could find a way to expose them, to get help, but every time I tried, I was met with resistance. So I thought it best to stay away, to keep you safe." James sat back, grappling with the storm of emotions that swirled within him. Anger, confusion, and a faint flicker of compassion collided in his heart. "You left me alone," he said quietly, his fists clenching at his sides. "I spent years wondering why you didn't want me. I was alone in that place. You have no idea what it was like." "I do know," Lucy replied, her voice breaking. "I lived with that pain every day, James. I wanted to come back so many times, but I was terrified that if I did, I would put you in danger." He looked at her, searching for any hint of deception, but all he found was a deep sorrow that mirrored his own. "And what about now?" he asked, his voice steadier. "What do you want from me?" "I want to be a part of your life again," she admitted, her eyes pleading. "I know I can never make up for the years we lost, but I want to help you understand your past. We can face it together." James felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of their shared history. "Together?" he scoffed. "How can I trust you after all this time? You left me to fend for myself." "I know I don't deserve your trust," Lucy said softly. "But I'm here now, and I want to make things right. I can help you, James. You're not alone anymore." "But I am alone," he countered, his voice rising with frustration. "You don't know what it's like to grow up without a family, to wonder every day if you were loved or wanted. I can't just forget that." "I never wanted you to forget," Lucy said urgently. "I want you to know the truth, to understand the circumstances that led to my leaving. You were everything to me, and I thought I was protecting you." James pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions. "You say you wanted to protect me, but your absence only caused me more pain." "I need time, Lucy," he said finally, his tone softer but resolute. "I need to think about all of this." Lucy nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. "I can give you time. I just hope you'll consider my side of the story. I've carried this burden for so long, and I want to share it with you." "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why come back after all these years?" "Because I couldn't live with the guilt any longer," she admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've watched from a distance, and I've seen the man you've become. I'm proud of you, but I also know that you're hurting. I had to reach out before it was too late." James felt his heart soften at her words, despite the anger still simmering within him. "You don't get to just walk back into my life and expect everything to be okay." "I know," Lucy replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "I'm willing to fight for your trust, James. It won't be easy, but I believe we can find a way forward together." He looked away, his mind racing with possibilities and doubts. "What if I can't forgive you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Then we'll work through that too," she said gently. "I'm not going anywhere this time. I'll be here whenever you're ready." The weight of her words settled over him, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. Perhaps there was a path forward, albeit a difficult one. Yet, deep down, he knew that healing would take time, and this was just the beginning of a long journey. "Let's take it one step at a time," James said, finally meeting her gaze. "I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to listen." Lucy's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, James. That's all I ask." As they sat in the fading light, the weight of the past still heavy between them, James felt a shift within himself. Perhaps accepting Lucy back into his life wouldn't erase the pain he had endured, but it could lead him to a better understanding of who he was and who he could still become. James stood at the head of the long, polished conference table, his hands hovering over the sleek tablet that displayed his meticulously crafted proposal for the sale of the company. Around him, the atmosphere crackled with tension. His partner, Mark, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, an expression of impatience etched on his face. The other board members murmured among themselves, their glances shifting between James and Mark as if awaiting an explosive showdown. "James," Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you know we can't keep dragging this out. The investors are eager to move forward. They want a decision, and they want it now." James felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him, a suffocating blanket that blurred his vision. "I understand that, Mark, but this isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. This company represents our values, our vision. We owe it to ourselves and to everyone who has worked here to ensure we don't lose sight of that." Mark scoffed, leaning forward. "Values? Come on, this is business. You think those investors care about our values? They see dollar signs, and they want to cash in. You're letting your personal issues cloud your judgment." At that moment, James felt a flash of anger surge within him. Memories of his past, of the life he had fought so hard to build, flickered through his mind. The earlier confrontation with Lucy, his estranged mother, lingered like a ghost, a constant reminder of the unresolved pain that shaped him. "My personal issues?" he retorted, his voice rising. "You have no idea what I've been through, Mark. This isn't just a transaction for me. It's about integrity." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing the growing tension. Mark smirked, unfazed. "You think your sob story gives you the right to hold us all hostage? We need to move forward, James. This company doesn't wait for anyone." James swallowed hard, feeling the pressure mount. He glanced around the room, seeking an ally, but the faces surrounding him were either indifferent or wary, unwilling to engage in the brewing conflict. "I need some time to think," he finally said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." As he stepped away from the table, the murmurs grew louder behind him. He could sense Mark's eyes boring into his back, a predator ready to pounce. "Time? You're going to regret this, James," Mark called after him. But James didn't turn around. He needed air, clarity, something that felt increasingly elusive. James exited the conference room, his heart racing. The walls of the office felt like they were closing in on him, a suffocating reminder of the expectations that weighed heavy on his shoulders. He wandered the sleek hallways, past framed accolades and photos of corporate triumphs, each step echoing with the uncertainty of his path. He made his way to the small, quiet garden behind the building, where the sounds of the bustling city faded into the background. The vibrant colors of the flowers contrasted sharply with his turbulent thoughts. He took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh scent of lilacs, hoping it would ground him. "James," a voice called softly from behind him. He turned to see Sophie approaching, her expression a mixture of concern and warmth. As a childhood friend and now a therapist, Sophie had always been someone he could rely on, a beacon of support in his tumultuous life. "Hey, Sophie," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just needed a moment." She stepped closer, her gaze searching his face. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. What happened in there?" James ran a hand through his hair, feeling the frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's Mark. He's pushing for the sale, and I can't get on board with it. Not when it feels like we're throwing away everything we built." Sophie nodded, her brow furrowing. "You're passionate about this, and that's important. But it sounds like you're also feeling a lot of pressure from him and the others. What do you really want?" He hesitated, the words tangled in his throat. "I want to stand up for what I believe in. I want to make decisions that feel right, not just the easy ones. But it's hard when I'm being pulled in so many directions." "Have you thought about what's driving that desire?" Sophie probed gently. "Is it just about the company, or is there something deeper at play?" James looked away, his thoughts drifting back to Lucy, to the revelations that had shaken the very foundation of his identity. "Maybe it's both," he admitted quietly. "I'm trying to figure out who I am and where I come from. It's like everything is tied together. My past, my family, my business decisions." Sophie stepped closer, her voice soothing. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes. You're navigating a lot right now. But remember, fighting for your values, both personally and in business, can give you strength. It's a part of who you are." He took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. "You're right. I can't let Mark or anyone else dictate my choices. I need to own my story." "Exactly," she encouraged, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "And it sounds like you're already doing that by seeking answers about your past. Embrace it. Use it as fuel to drive your decisions." James nodded slowly, a newfound determination igniting within him. "I'll talk to Mark again. I'll make my case about the company. But I also need to confront my past with Lucy. I can't keep running away from it." Sophie smiled, pride evident in her expression. "That sounds like a solid plan. Just remember, confronting the past can be painful, but it's also a chance for healing. You have the strength to face it." As they stood together in the garden, James felt a sense of clarity washing over him. He understood that the path ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to embrace the challenges. With Sophie's encouragement, he felt empowered to fight for both his business and his identity, determined to forge a future that honored his past while building something meaningful. James felt the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders as he sat across from Lucy in the quiet cafe. The air teemed with tension, the kind that hung between them like an unyielding fog. He had come seeking answers, and in his heart, he was ready to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Lucy, with her wise, aged eyes, looked at him, her expression a mixture of apprehension and hope. "James," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "you deserve to know everything. I've kept so many secrets from you, and I can't hold them in any longer." James leaned forward, the urgency in her tone igniting a flicker of anxiety within him. "What do you mean? What else is there? You've already told me about the orphanage, about how you left." His voice trailed off, the memories still fresh and raw. Lucy took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the window where the autumn leaves danced in the breeze. "It's not just about that. There's something more, something I've carried with me for decades. I need you to understand why I had to leave. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I've been searching for answers my entire life," James replied, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I've been wondering why you abandoned me, why you never came back." Tears welled in Lucy's eyes. "I didn't abandon you, James. I thought about you every single day, but I was trapped in a situation I couldn't control. I couldn't risk your safety." James shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "What situation? You have to tell me. I deserve to know why I spent my childhood in an orphanage, why I grew up without a family." Lucy's hand trembled as she reached into her coat pocket. "I've been holding onto this for years," she said, pulling out an old, weathered envelope. "A letter I never had the courage to send." "What's that?" James asked, a mix of curiosity and dread filling him as he watched her hands shake. "This letter. It's about your brother," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. James's heart raced. "Brother? What do you mean? I don't have a brother." "James, you do." Lucy's voice cracked. "You have a twin brother, born the same day as you. We were both put in the orphanage after I was forced to leave." The revelation hit James like a freight train, knocking the breath from his lungs. "A twin brother? Why didn't you tell me before?" "I didn't know where he was. I searched for years, but I couldn't find him. I didn't want to burden you with the truth until I had more information," Lucy explained, her tears flowing freely now. "But now I found him. He's alive, James. He's been looking for you too." James sat back, stunned into silence. The world around him seemed to blur as he processed the weight of Lucy's words. "Alive?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Where is he?" "He's in the city, James. I can arrange for you to meet him," Lucy offered, her eyes filled with hope. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I want you to have the family you've always deserved." A whirlwind of emotions surged within James, anger, confusion, but also a flicker of something else, a longing he hadn't realized he still harbored. "Why now, Lucy? Why tell me now?" "Because I can't keep hiding the truth," she replied, her voice steadying. "You've grown into a remarkable man, despite everything. You deserve to know your past, to understand who you are." James felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. "I need time," he said, his voice trembling. "Time to process all of this. It's too much." "I understand," Lucy said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here for you, and so is your brother. We want to be a part of your life." As he left the cafe, James's mind whirled with the revelation of a twin brother, a piece of his past he had never known existed. The weight of this new information settled heavily on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope amid the chaos. Perhaps, just perhaps, this could be the beginning of healing the deep wounds that had shaped his life.
If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel now. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Leave a like if you liked it.